Good evening and welcome to the Town of Cary's Planning and Zoning Board meeting for March 22nd, 2021. I'll call this meeting to order. Thank you for joining us tonight from your home. We are following the governor's state of emergency orders and are streaming tonight's meeting virtually. All board members, staff members, and applicants are participating remotely. While this is a public meeting, please be aware that it is not a public hearing. Just as was the case for the in-person planning and zoning board meetings, there is no opportunity for the public to speak during this meeting. If you have comments about any of these cases, we encourage you to reach out to the staff case manager or the applicant by email or phone. You may reach out to our board members through email. You may also contact council directly through email or during the public speaks out portion of any regularly scheduled town council meeting. Because we are meeting remotely, I will call on each member individually to confirm their attendance at this meeting. Chuck Montgomery will not be joining us this evening. All motions, seconds, and votes will be verbally obtained. So first, our roll call. First item on the agenda will be our roll call. The following, and we know that Chuck Montgomery is not here. We'll go through the rest of the members and see if they are present. I'll call on each of you if you can state if you are present. Don Hamilton.
Present.
Nicole Samuel. Nicole? Nicole is not with us. Mary Jo Hill.
Present.
Steve Crutchfield.
Present.
Jessica Pearson.
Present.
John Sorrell. John, are you with us? John is not able to make it with us tonight. Jessica McClure.
Present.
And I am Dan McFarland. I am also present. So moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is the adoption of the agenda. Is there any motion to adopt tonight's agenda?
This is Don. I make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I will call on each of you to state your vote. Don?
Aye.
Nicole? Nicole's absent, I'm sorry. Mary Jo Hill?
Aye.
Steve Crutchfield?
Aye.
Jessica Pearson?
Aye.
Jessica McClure?
Aye.
And I vote in the affirmative as well. Passes unanimously. Okay, next item is the approval of the regular minutes from the February 22nd Planning and Zoning Board meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Steve, thank you. Is there a second?
This is Don. I second.
Thank you, Don. Okay, again, a roll call for each of you to state your vote on accepting the minutes. Don?
Aye.
Nicole? I'm sorry, Nicole is absent. Mary Jo Hill? Mary Jo? Mary Jo, are you with us? Let me move on to other items and maybe Mary Jo will come back to us. Steve Crutchfield?
She was muted. Mary Jo?
I said aye, I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Steve Crutchfield?
Aye.
Jessica Pearson?
Aye.
Jessica McClure?
Aye.
And I vote affirmative as well. Okay, so moving on to our cases. Our first case this evening is 19 REZ 17, which is known as the Dillinger rezoning. It's the first of the three cases before us this evening. Assistant Planning Director Deborah Grannon will share the staff's presentation. Then we'll hear from the applicant. Following the applicant's remarks, all board members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the staff or the applicant. Before the staff begins, I believe the board member Jessica McClure has a disclosure to share. Jessica?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Just wanted to declare that the company I work for, Ramey Kemp Associates, did the traffic study for this project as part of the on-call for the town of Cary. I myself did not work on the traffic study, and that relationship will not influence my recommendations tonight.
Okay, thank you, Jessica, for sharing that. Ms. Grannon, you may proceed.
Thank you. Good evening, board. For your consideration this evening is a request to amend a 23-acre portion of the Dillinger Planned Development District located at 1901 Piney Plains Road. The subject property is located, I'm sorry, bear with me one moment. My PowerPoint stopped working. I'll be right with you. Here we go. The site is located on the south side of Piney Plains Road at the intersection with Dillard Drive, approximately a quarter-mile west of Walnut Street, and it's located at the north end of Tryon Manor Road, where it intersects with Macedonia Lake Road. The Centrum Shopping Center is east of the site, and the Lodge at Crossroads Apartments are located to the west, and the Tryon Villas neighborhood is located to the south of the subject property. According to Cary's most recent GIS maps, the site is impacted by stream buffers, and field determination will be required at the time of development plan review. Cary's Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Master Plan identifies the Spate Branch Greenway Trail that traverses the property, and with any development, a street side trail is required to be constructed across a portion of the property's frontage, and the requirement is also for a greenway easement to be dedicated. The property fronts both Piney Plains Road and Dillard Drive, both of which are thoroughfares. And the southern tip of the property, where Tryon Manor Drive currently terminates, that is a collector avenue, which has been proposed to cross over this site on Cary's comprehensive transportation plan for over 20 years. A Go Triangle bus route is established along the property's frontage on Piney Plains Road, and a Go Cary bus route is located less than a quarter of a mile from the site. The property is zoned Planned Development District Major, specifically the Dillinger Pdd, which includes the subject property, as well as 3 parcels located on the north side of Piney Plains Road. The Dillinger Pdd was approved in 2000. It allowed for 25,000 square feet of retail use on Tract 3, 180,000 square feet of office and 20,000 square feet of commercial use on Tract 4, and 25 residential units on Tract 5. And in compliance with the comprehensive transportation plan that I just mentioned, the PDD did show that continuation of Tryon Village Drive across the site. So what's being proposed with this amendment is a change for each of these tracts. Tract 3 is proposed to be converted to allow up to 40,000 square feet of office with a minimum of 15,000 square feet of office. And then there is also a maximum of 10,000 square feet of medical office. For Tract 4, the applicant proposes 285 residential multifamily dwelling units and a minimum of 5,000 square feet and a maximum of 10,000 square feet of first floor office use. And for Tract 5, the residential designation now specifies that that use will be limited to townhouses, and the unit count is reduced from 25 to 20 units. Because this site is located in a destination center, the proposed PDD amendment requires submittal of a preliminary development plan. This is the version of the plan that was presented to Town Council last November. The office tract in the upper corner for the 10,000 to 40,000 square feet of office. The earlier version of the plan showed 300 residential multifamily dwelling units, and that number has changed. And then there is the 25 townhomes, which is now proposed to be 20, and a significant design element that was on an earlier version of the plan that included a traffic circle located at the intersection of Tryon Manor Drive and Macedonia Lake Drive. A traffic impact analysis was conducted for the project, and it identified improvements at 8 off-site intersections. The applicant has proposed improvements only at the site intersections and provided justification for not offering off-site improvements, including the extension of the road that I just mentioned. There was a neighborhood meeting held at Cary Town Hall that took place in person in December of 2019. There were 11 attendees. Questions and concerns were related to building height, traffic impact, street connectivity. Staff has also received a number of phone calls from adjacent property owners with concerns about the continuation of Tryon Manor Road, the Greenway location, the amount of multifamily in the vicinity, and what types of traffic calming measures might be used. When the case went to Town Council on November 12th, there were comments from 4 citizens. The concerns focused on the preservation of champion trees and open space, the extension of Tryon Manor Drive, what sort of impact a traffic circle might have on the perimeter buffer adjacent to that traffic calming device, concerns about density and the amount of residential multifamily in the area, and one citizen had concerns about litter and crime that could potentially be associated with rental property. The Town Council had some comments and concerns about the case, also about residential multifamily in the vicinity. They emphasized the importance of quality design standards, expressed concern about environmental considerations, had questions and concerns about the traffic circle impact on the buffer, and then they voiced support for office use. Since the Town Council public hearing, the applicant has made the following changes to their proposal. They've reduced the number of residential multifamily units from 300 to 285. They've reduced the townhouses from 25 to 20, and as a result of that, they also added more open space to Tract 5 at the southern portion of the tract. They increased the number of vehicular charging stations from 2 to 4. They added zoning conditions to provide on-site recycling, composting, and use of LED lights in the parking areas. And then they added a condition that specified when that greenway would actually be constructed, that it would be prior to the issuance of the first residential multifamily certificate of occupancy. And one of the more significant changes was the traffic circle that had caused a lot of concern for the adjacent property owners. They removed that from the proposal and replaced it with a raised intersection at the intersection of Tryon Manor Drive and Macedonia Lake Drive. And the applicants also offered a condition to construct a raised pedestrian crossing, both on-site as well as a off-site pedestrian crossing south of the site. So what's before you tonight looks like this without the traffic circle. Building setbacks and streetscapes meet the LDO standard. The community gathering space that they've proposed is over 2 times the LDO standard. They're proposing 40% masonry on the multifamily building. The plan also includes some modifications to LDO standards. They are seeking a reduction to parking at a reduction of 30% to the LDO standards. They have provided some justification for this by means of a zoning condition that would have a minimum of 45% of the units being 1-bedroom units and a maximum of 10% being 3-bedroom units. Building heights that are proposed are 55 feet for office, 60 feet for the residential multifamily building, and townhouses would be allowed to be 45 feet. The applicant commissioned a tree survey for the property that identified 10 champion trees on the site. As part of the PDP process, they requested permission to remove 4 of the trees, shown with the red circles. Then there's 1 tree that's located in close proximity to a proposed stormwater control measure, and the applicants asked that staff be allowed to consider that tree for removal or allow some impacts to the root zone during development plan review. And then I'd also like to point out that 5 champion trees shown with the green dots on this map are proposed to be preserved. In our analysis of the request against the policies of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, staff finds that the live, work, shape, move, and engage chapters are all applicable to this request. By offering residential multifamily and townhomes, they're providing more housing options and supporting infill development. The retention of office use on Tract 3 and then offering office use in a mixed-use building helps grow Cary's workforce, and it enhances the appeal to businesses and workers. Then looking at the future growth framework map, the site is located in a destination center. And that's where the Cary Community Plan's intent is to locate Cary's greatest development intensities. Predominant uses include mixed use and open space, and a PDD is recognized as an appropriate zoning district. The proposal aligns with several chapter elements for a destination center: urban design, framing a street, buildings of about 3 to 7 stories in height, and a well-defined and well-connected street and pedestrian network. That said, even with wanting to concentrate higher densities and intensities in a destination center, there have been a number of questions about the existing multifamily development in this area. And as you may have noted in the staff report, within a half mile of the site, there's 1,368 existing dwelling units. Within a mile, there's 300 dwelling units. And we've had concerns from some neighbors about the amount of residential multifamily that's currently being proposed. So in addition to the subject parcel with its proposal for 285 residential multifamily units, across the street, the Piney Plains rezoning case proposes 360 residential multifamily units. That case has not been presented for a public hearing yet. Then the Jones Franklin site proposes 275 residential multifamily units. That case did go to a public hearing about 6 months ago, and so that's on hold at the moment. We're not sure what the status is on that. And then the Macedonia case across the street has an existing entitlement for 300 residential multifamily units. That's already an existing entitlement, but they're proposing a modification to remove an age restriction on that case. So there's a lot of activity going on in this area. Looking further at the shape chapter, the plan complies with other policies, including supporting infill development and providing appropriate transitions between uses, especially with where they've positioned the different uses on the site. When we look at the engage chapter, the proposal complies with the policy of providing a highly functional, safe, well-maintained greenway network. In the LDO, it is a requirement to construct a street side trail, and we also require a greenway easement dedication, but the applicant's taking it a step further and actually offering to construct that greenway trail and offering to do that before they request a certificate of occupancy for any of the residential multifamily units. In looking at the move chapter, by offering to provide the raised intersections and the 2 pedestrian crosswalks, the preliminary development plan meets the policy of ensuring safety for all users and modes. And our staff feels that this intersection is a good safety measure. We have heard from some neighbors who were asking for a 3-way stop at this intersection. Our transportation engineers do not recommend doing that, that it's safer to look at something like this type of traffic calming device. And also we note that the extension of Tryon Manor Drive and completing this road network is going to improve traffic flow in the vicinity of the site. One other thing I'd like to point out regarding Tryon Manor Drive, there was concern expressed by some neighbors about the road location. On the original comprehensive transportation plan, it showed Tryon Manor Drive much closer to the Centrum at Crossroads Shopping Center, kind of hugging the eastern side of the site. Well, because of the NCDOT project and the repositioning of the ramp off of US 1 and 64, DOT and staff worked with the applicant and have discovered it would be much safer and more efficient for the full movement access drive to the site to be as close to the western edge of the site as possible. So that's the reasoning why that shifted over. So in staff's preliminary evaluation of this request, we find that policies from the live, work, shape, engage, and move chapter all have applicable policies. The request supports infill, provides appropriate transitions with those buffers that either meet or exceed LDO standards. It provides a mix of use and the density that we look for in destination centers. And probably one of the most important elements, that staff looked at is that it completes this road network and makes greenway connections. So board considerations: are the proposed uses appropriate? Are there a sufficient mix of uses proposed for this destination center? Are the LDO modifications justified or balanced by the design standards that are proposed? And this concludes staff's presentation, other than to say that staff does recommend for this plan to be consistent with the Imagine Cary community plan. The applicant's representative, Jason Barron with Morningstar, is here to share comments on the request. And then he and I will both be available for your questions. Mr. Barron?
Thank you, Ms. Grannon. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group. Here representing the applicant for this rezoning case. Also joining me tonight and available to answer questions that you may have is Mr. Ed Tang of Withers Ravenel, whose firm has been provided engineering and land planning associated with the proposal that is before you. The staff, as always, has done a very thorough job in describing the elements of the proposal at hand, as well as documenting the changes that have gone on since this since this case started and to where it is at today. I did want to highlight a handful of things. The first is I want to highlight the site's location, and that's a significant point. Because, and Ms. Grannon, if there's a way for me to move to slide 26, one of the things that we have been a victim to, and I don't mean to overstate that point, but this slide is a slide that represents changes that the North Carolina Department of Transportation in the long term will be making to the Walnut Street corridor. And so what you're seeing here, this new signal, so the yellow that exists in front of this, the parcel, and so kind of in the center of your screen and the bottom of it is the Dillinger Pdd portion that we're working on. That signal that kind of appears to be at the top of the property, that doesn't currently exist today. That is a revision that's being proposed by the Department of Transportation. They have proposed changes that have essentially moved the Walnut Street intersection over to Piney Plains and Dillard. And so you can see the off-ramp and on-ramp for 64 are now going to be plugging into the front of this parcel and no longer will be accessing Walnut Street at their current location. So put another way, the Walnut Street intersection will no longer exist as an intersection with 64. And that's significant as it relates to what this property can and should be used for. Now, that signal exists, but one of the things you will note in our PDT, in our preliminary development plan, and Ms. Grannon, if you wouldn't mind floating back to that, and I apologize for having to do this, but I do think it's an important point to understand. The preliminary development plan, so you can kind of see towards the top of this exhibit, that is the proposed intersection. Now, if you look at the intersections in and out of this site, one of the things you won't see is a signal associated with this site. There is a signal proposed as part of the interchange that will exist to the north of this site, but that's actually not part of the project that we'll be developing, and we won't have the benefit, we being the development team, won't have the benefit of being able to plug into that signal. What that means is that it's a site that will have essentially limited access. And the reason I make that point for the benefit of the Planning and Zoning Board is just to reinforce that, 21 years ago, this site was zoned for a primarily office development. Over the course of the last 21 years, at a time when this site has enjoyed very good access to public transportation, it hasn't developed as an office site, and there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not really in a location, even under ideal circumstances, that office could work. With these changes, it further reinforces that, because essentially what DOT is doing is putting a signal, dropping a signal in front of the development, but then not providing access for the benefit of this site to that signal. If they provided that, and we spent a lot of time working with the town as well as NCDOT during this process to work those issues out to understand the impacts. Had they proposed essentially an intersection for Tryon Manor Drive through this site into that new intersection, I think it would have changed how this site behaved. What they did ultimately is essentially dictate that for the first 21 years of this property being zoned for office, it never zoned for office. And with these changes, the likelihood of office ever coming to the site gets even worse. However, it gets really good for a multifamily development. And the reason why is that you want to locate your multifamily uses in close proximity to major transportation networks. Part of what we're always trying to do from a planning standpoint is to try to locate our most dense and intense uses, not only in destination centers like this property is, but also as close as we can to our major transportation networks so that we're not overburdening town streets. And it just makes it easier for people who are going to live at sites like this to get out on the 64, US 140 and drive to the major employment areas that exist in and around this property. So I did want to help you understand a little bit in terms of what DOT is doing, how it impacts the site, and how we believe it further reinforces the value of having a higher density and higher intensity multifamily property. However, it's not just a multifamily property. It still comes with complementary office up to 50,000 square feet. The multifamily building has been revised during this process to include up to 10,000 square feet of office within the site, within that multifamily building as well. I do want to note that by including that including that office in that multifamily building, technically the streetscape along Piney Plains Road per the ordinance is reduced to 30 feet. My client, recognizing this is a primarily multifamily project, has chosen to keep that 50-foot streetscape, to keep that 50-foot type A streetscape along Piney Plains Road. Also, as Ms. Grandin noted in her presentation, the site enjoys tremendous access to transit between Go Cary and Go Triangle, walkable, bikeable to those transit stops. This area in general, it has tremendous walkable and bikeable options to existing retail services over at Centrum, over to Crossroads, with the extension of Tryon Manor Drive, which is a significant part of the town's transportation plan. You're extending a collector street. Tryon Manor Drive actually weaves its way south down to even more services. There is the Harris Teeter Shopping Center over at Tryon Village. There's restaurants over there. There's more office that's planned for that location. So if you kind of put all of those elements into this property and what's going on with this property, as well as what DOT is doing, it really starts to paint the picture of a more multifamily centric development with complementary office and then having the townhome development. As Ms. Grandin noted, you know, the townhome portion of this development is actually being decreased compared to where it was originally zoned as a result of the changes that we made following the public hearing. We've eliminated townhomes to the south of Tryon Manor Drive and have converted that to open space in an effort to better buffer the townhomes that exist to the south of the site. We've eliminated that traffic circle that folks in the community were concerned about related to how that would potentially conflict with their homes. And we've worked closely with the staff to figure out a good solution there. We've added conditions, as Ms. Grandin noted, with respect to the timing of the timing of when that greenway was going to come into existence, which again kind of further reinforces why having multifamily in this area makes a lot of sense. And so, you know, I believe this is a use that makes sense for a number of reasons. You've got a developer who's been highly responsive to everyone who has provided comments, whether it's staff, community, or council, and I think your staff report shows that. And we agree with the staff's recommendation or finding that this is consistent with the Cary community plan. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have, as is Mr. Tang, but otherwise we would respectfully request you all also find that this proposal is consistent with the Cary community plan and forward this case to the council with their finding related to the same. Thank you.
Dan, you're muted. Sir.
All right, I'll unmute myself as we sit here and try to do this virtually. Thank you, Mr. Barron, and thank you, Ms. Grandin, for your presentations. Thank you very much. There was a lot of information there. So I'm going to ask each board member to share any questions, and as we have in other meetings, we'll go one at a time. And I'll call on each of you to ask questions, and when we get through the first round, I'll offer an opportunity if folks want to go back and ask a second set of questions. So we're in the question stage. So we'll start off with Don Hamilton. Don, any questions for staff or the applicant's representative?
I had a few, but everything was covered during the presentation. I don't know if now's the time to question it or comment. I know we've had several cases where the parking has been reduced. I'm trying to remember, has it been a 30% reduction on the other ones? This seems kind of high, but my memory's not serving me well.
This is actually consistent with a number of reductions that we've had. They've generally, for the most part, been in the 30% range. We've had a few of them a little bit less than that, a few of them slightly above it, but this is very similar to what we've seen with other cases.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, Don?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. Mary Jo Hill. Any questions? You may be on mute. Mary Jo?
That better?
Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for staff. What is this raised sidewalk? I don't think we've seen that before. I'm just curious how that works.
Yes, that is a treatment that's done to the pavement. It's like a modified traffic calming device, not a speed hump or a speed table, but we do have one of our transportation engineers on the call if he's available. Mr. Priyatham Kanda can speak to that and give you a little bit more detail about the design if he's available.
Yes, Deborah, thank you. So raised intersection is essentially raising the center of the intersection and the intersection approaches. It's like a speed hump within an intersection where it is elevated by 3 to 6 inches approximately. What it does, it slows down the drivers going through the intersection, encourages them to slow down for pedestrians crossing at the intersection, and it's a pretty effective traffic calming measure.
So you say it's a traffic calming measure, but so it's not for pedestrians. Is it? I don't understand how it functions. I'm sorry.
They're offering both the raised intersection, and then they're also offering a second condition for 2 pedestrian crossings that would have a raised feature with the pedestrian crossings.
With the crossing area. where
The
it's in the
crossing
street.
area on the Greenway Trail, right, separate from this intersection.
I see.
Yeah, at a raised intersection, even the locations where the pedestrians cross is also raised, so it provides better visibility of the pedestrians to the drivers.
Okay, I understand. Thank you for that. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, thank you, Mary Jo. Steve Crutchfield, questions for the staff or applicant?
Just a couple of questions. First of all, the 4 EV charging stations, is that for the multifamily and the office, or just a multifamily?
I can answer that, Mr. Crutchfield. That is for the multifamily development. We're not excluding anything associated with the office tract. The office tract, as of right now, doesn't have an active tenant for moving forward. The multifamily does, and so we were really gearing that towards making sure we knew that the multifamily was going to have that, but not doing anything to the exclusion of what would happen on the office tract.
Okay, that's fair. And then the champion trees, what? And if I missed this, I'm sorry. Is there a replacement for the champion trees, or it just would be in the buffer, the green area? What's going on with that?
I'm happy to answer so the trees that have been requested for removal are trees, and I think they're identified with yellow dots on the screen that you're looking at. They conflict with developable areas primarily from a grading standpoint. It's just tough to work within a site like this, have a large footprint use like office as well as multifamily, and manage your way around trees. We are saving trees in the environmentally sensitive areas and making sure that we grade outside of those areas. I'll let the staff, who is far more far better versed on the replacement value, but anytime you replace a tree or request removal of a tree, there is an associated replacement that goes along with that based upon the diameter of the tree being requested for removal.
Well, okay, that's fair. I mean, I understand where they have to be removed, but I was just curious about you know, and I understand it's hard to replace them, but I was just kind of curious how that worked. I can't remember. I think in previous cases we've done, they've actually been replaced elsewhere on the tracks.
And I would like to call on one of our other planners to give you a little bit more insight. We've got Doug Loveland on the call, who works with development plan review on a regular basis. And you've met him before when he's talked to you about buffers and those requirements. So Doug, if you could provide a little bit more insight into how tree replacement works.
I'd be happy to. Thank you. Yes, when an applicant is allowed to remove a champion tree, the ordinance requires replacement inch per inch. So if they remove 100-inch caliper inches of champion trees, they'd be required to replace that on site. If they run out of room on site, then they are required to plant off site on a town of Cary property, and we'd work with them on identifying locations for that. So you are required to replace. Potentially as an alternative, they could also preserve an area of existing trees that wasn't otherwise slated to be preserved, that wasn't in wetlands or buffers, and they can preserve that, and they actually get a higher credit for preserving that. So they have a few options there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Jessica Pearson, questions for staff or applicant?
Thank you. I do have a couple questions for staff. Ms. Grandin, I was reviewing the traffic study that was attached to the agenda, and I just don't understand parts of it. It suggests that there are 2,000, the analysis suggests that there are 2,000 additional trips during peak times, and that the level of service for most of the intersections in and around the development would be a level of service F, which I just did a Google search, and that I was like, how many different levels of service are there? Well, obviously A is the best and F is the worst. And then there were recommendations in the analysis for offsite improvements, and in your presentation, you told us that none of the offsite improvements are going to be taken by the developer. So my question is, all of these trips are being added, and this area already has a lot of traffic.
Mhm.
I'm very familiar with it. So why is the analysis making or why is the analysis being ignored, I guess is the question.
It is not being ignored. I'm going to let Priyatham speak to it a little bit, and I'm going to let Mr. Barron speak to it as well. But a few important points to consider is that this use is actually going to generate less traffic than the previous entitlement. So this is in a sense a downzoning in terms of intensity. So with the previous entitlement for office and commercial uses, that would have been a higher trip generator.
So is the report that's attached, is that from a previous iteration? Or is it for?
No, it's for this case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then, you know, the applicant, the traffic study does point out different impacts, you know, the different mitigations that are recommendations, but it's up to the applicant if they want to volunteer any of those.
Okay.
So that's really a good question. Mr. Conda can add to this, and then Mr. Barron may want to comment as well on what the justification was.
Yeah, I'll let Mr. Conda chime in on kind of the role of, you know, kind of how TARs work, and then I'm more than happy to provide the applicant's perspective. I mean, consistent with the justification statement that is linked to the staff report. So I'll let Priyatham take it here.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Thanks, Deborah. So what you pointed out that, you know, several intersections in the study area are operating at or are expected to operate at level of service F is in fact true, because this is in a pretty busy area of Cary near several connections to interchange ramps, and some of these intersections are a little bit congested, and there are some improvements that are recommended as part of the traffic study. But if you can see, the study area that's used in the study is a 1 mile study area, and So essentially, it captures everything within 1 mile study area. Even if the impact of the site trips is minimal, if the level of service goes beyond level of service D, it does capture that in the study. So we also look at what other improvements are upcoming to address some of these improvements. DOT has a major project that's going to help some of the nearby intersections, but that project is down the road. And so
Okay.
we try to identify which ones are the ones that are mainly impacted by site traffic. They're the ones that are within close proximity, site entrances, and other intersections where most of the site trips are coming through. So we identified those, and those are the ones that will have some improvements from DOT's project.
Okay.
There are some in the extremities of the study area that have some delays, but those are existing conditions, and some of the improvements could get really expensive and would not have adequate right of way to make those improvements.
Okay.
So that's my understanding of the recommendation in the traffic study. And if Jason can provide some additional information on why they haven't been able to commit to some of those, that'll be great.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Conda.
Yeah, and that's great. And thank you for providing the expertise associated with that. I know enough about how the TAR works to be dangerous. But Ms. Pearson, linked to your staff report is a copy of the justification letter that was provided, and I won't run through each of those, but it talked about each of the improvements. I would tell you that at the intersections that were studied, where improvement is not being provided, in no instance is traffic generated by this development generating more than 2% of the traffic at each of those intersections. In a lot of instances, it's 0.5 to 1% of the total trips. A number of the intersections show that even with the improvement, the level of service that you point out, F, that's, that sounds like a bad grade, and then you look it up and it is a bad grade. That level of F would exist with or without the improvement that is recommended for a variety of those intersections. And so I'm happy to walk through those individually, but again, from an equity standpoint, in terms of what impact this development is having at each of those intersections, it didn't seem fair to us to make improvements to intersections that were already overburdened with traffic, especially recognizing we're less than 2% of the traffic at all of them. And I would offer that the significant extension of Tryon Manor Drive, which is costly and is being shouldered by this development. I mean, this developer is going to be paying for that, along with the Greenway construction, we felt like would better serve the traffic that was being generated by this site. And it, kind of offsets the kind of the perceived, why are they ignoring it? We certainly didn't ignore it. It's just kind of weighing on balance what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.
I genuinely appreciate the explanation from both staff and the applicant's representative. I guess I just didn't understand it, and that's why I raised the question. And so I appreciate that this development is not responsible for impacting the level of service in those intersections. I go there to that area frequently for shopping at like Lowe's and Target and stuff. So I recognize that it's already a busy place. So thank you for addressing my questions. I don't have any further questions.
Thank you, Jessica Pearson. Jessica McClure, questions for staff or the applicant?
Yeah, just two quick ones. I know we had a slide about transit routes going through here, and I didn't know if we knew offhand where the nearest transit stop was.
Yes,
Or
there will be a stop right in front of the subject property.
okay, is that something they're committing to and putting in a pad? Or
They'll
shelter?
have to provide the pad area for it, but the shelter is not a requirement, and that has not been offered as a zoning condition.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And then one other question, as far as the greenway, does it exist north or south of this property right now?
Yes, it does to the south, and if we can get Aaron to take us back, it's one of our earlier slides. Let me get the slide number here.
Google might be
Slide
old.
number 4. So you can see the solid green line shows you where the greenway exists today, to the south of the subject property.
Okay.
And then the dashed green line is the proposed greenway extension.
Would the town be responsible for completing that connection from the
Yes.
existing?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, excellent. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Before I start with my question, I just want to double check, make sure Nicole, Samuel, and John Sorrell didn't join the meeting late. Julie, are they still absent?
I do not see them on the call.
Thank you. I just wanted to double check. I should have done that in the beginning. I do have some questions. So let me start off, I guess. I think it's slide 22, if could you go back to, this is for staff, for Deborah, could you go back to the one that shows the destination center?
Oh, okay, that'll be slide number 7. I'm
It's
sorry,
slide
no,
number 7.
sorry. Destination center. Aaron's got it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Because I want to remind myself that this is part of a destination center. And the Cary Community Plan has specific language about destination centers. So if I just pause on this for a minute, so as my overlay, okay, I appreciate that. So this parcel that the case before us is included as part of that destination center, as well as the parcel that staff mentioned that was to the north, which was also proposed for multifamily, as well as essentially the whole east side of Piney Plains. Okay, thank you very much. That was helpful.
Okay.
My question, so maybe I'll jump into my questions. A lot of them have to do with transportation and traffic. And I do appreciate that the applicant has worked very hard on a challenging piece of land and also been trying to be responsible as they possibly can. To a lot of the comments are there. This was, I have to say, this is my 6th year on the board, and this is one of the hardest ones to get my head wrapped around, both by cardinal point orientation, partially because not all of our attachments were cardinal point oriented, and so trying to understand what is north and when we refer to north, it's not really true north. So what I'm trying to understand is, and this maybe Mr. Conda can help us out. I want to understand what's going to, long-term, what's going to happen to this intersection, given what DOT is proposing. I think that's slide 26. One of my questions is, what happens to that piece of land that is currently Piney Plains Road? That's not part of this parcel, but I am curious as to what happens to that piece of orphan land there. And then my other questions will be where the applicant is showing the egress, the exit for the road on the Piney Plains. I think one earlier, I thought I saw a drawing that actually had it lining up with the Piney Plains, but it doesn't. So I'm trying to understand the traffic in and out. So I'll start off with this one. This is the first time I've seen this slide. So it's the first visual I've had, at least, to see what's going on at that intersection. And it caused me to pause and just change a little bit. So perhaps staff could help us know what the time frame on this is looking like, because I saw in the notes and that this was going to happen next decade, maybe perhaps long after this development is there. This development, if it is approved, it gets built out. So maybe some more background about this. Thanks.
The most recent information I saw on the NCDOT website about this was targeting a completion by 2027. So it's definitely not coming immediately, but it is definitely planned in the relatively near future. So your other question about that gray hatched area where it's existing right of way right now.
Yes.
I'm I'm assuming, and Mr. Kondo may be able to help me with this, if you do a right-of-way abandonment, then it's going to go to the adjacent property owner is, likely what's going to happen with that. There's probably going to need to be the retention of some right-of-way, in that vicinity.
And Deborah, I can speak to that a little bit. This is Doug Lowell
Sure.
again with planning. It depends on how that was deeded to begin with. It's a really good question that has varying answers depending on the history of the property. If it was originally deeded property from a deed, it could revert back to that original property owner. There's Deborah's guess, I think, is probably the best one, is it's going to get split to the adjacent properties, but there are other variations, and it just depends on the history and the deeding of the properties. I'm not an attorney, but that's how I understand it. Attorneys just spent half an hour explaining this to me.
Yeah, and if it's appropriate, Mr. McFarland, I might be able to chime in with some value on that point. It's rare that I can say that out loud, but I think I can. And so practically speaking, we have designed this entire site around DOT changes that started shortly after we filed the case, really hijacked the case for an extended period of time. Then those changes got shelved indefinitely, and then they came back. And so we are assuming, and we're, kind of playing in the sandbox with DOT, as is the town. We're assuming that what DOT is telling everybody is in fact going to happen. And the town, to their credit, has moved Tryon Manor Drive significantly in order to accommodate those DOT changes, so that when DOT comes in to condemn right-of-way, they're not having to condemn significant improvements that everybody's planned around. As it relates to that kind of what I'll call a triangular dead piece, from a timing standpoint, development of this site will occur before the time frame that Ms. Grannon mentioned in her comments. So what's going to happen is this site is essentially going to develop, and then when DOT comes in, they're going to condemn what they want. If there is a remnant parcel, Mr. Loveland is correct, that will be deeded to the adjacent property owner. I mean, that's just kind of the default under North Carolina law. And so what you're going to end up with is just kind of an area that's not developed for anything. We're still going to have all of the associated streetscapes based upon the property lines that exist as of today. And then there's just going to be kind of this DOT maintained green area after that.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate everybody's input, and Jason and Mr. Barron, that was very helpful. Being kind of a visual learner, rewrapping my head around this proposal to understand in and out. And so maybe that'd be the next question, and if we can go back to a slide that shows the proposed extension in the roadway that would be terminating on the Piney Plains Road.
Yeah, we can just, there you go. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you. Okay, this is helpful. So I'm assuming as I look at this now, that on the office track, that would be accessed off of Dillard Drive if on that parcel. So they'd be in and out off of Dillard Drive. And then as we look at the extension on to the, I guess, to the south of the property, south of the, or southwest of the family tract, we'll end up on the Piney Plains. Could somebody walk me through what traffic improvements have been proposed there? I mean, I guess my question is, how does somebody take a left turn coming out of the apartment project, or the apartment development, multifamily development? Is there turn lanes?
We haven't,
lighting, et cetera?
this hasn't been designed yet. This is really
Okay.
that level of detail we will get to with the development plan, the minutia of it. As you can see with the proposal, it's a full movement, full movement to the intersection that's along the western side of the property, and then right in, right out on Dillard. But yeah, this will get finalized when we have the detailed drawings, when we have the engineered drawings and the actual plan, taking into consideration everything, topography, other site conditions, soil, all of that will come into play. You don't get that level of detail with a plan until you get an entitlement. They're not gonna spend thousands of dollars on designing the intersection until they know whether or not they have the approval to go forward with the project.
So
So right now, it's just, as we look at it, they're proposing a full movement intersection, and the details to follow.
Right, right.
that is correct, Mr. McFarland, and I would just add, that is based upon, while my client hasn't spent thousands of dollars engineering that access point, they have definitely spent thousands of dollars working with DOT and the town to understand what the potential long-range impact of this new intersection is, where that signal is going to be, where this access could be located, and what everybody's best guesstimate as of today is with how that is going to operate. So we are showing a full movement access there because all of the information that's been provided to us from DOT leads us to believe that by locating it as far as away from we can as the proposed signal, that it ultimately will be a full movement access. And so that's what we have reflected as our best understanding of the information that we've received from DOT as well as from the town. But Ms. Grannon's right, we won't know for sure until we get to the point of driveway permits.
Okay. Thank you. Two last questions. Because the parking came into an issue, I'm assuming the parking study that this town is undertaking is still in process. So we don't have any results from that
It's getting close. Yeah, we're going to be presenting findings to the town council in April at a work session. And
Okay.
so we'll have some more definitive numbers to share with them and then with you shortly after that.
Okay. Thank you. One other question in regards to, I think, a study that at the last council meeting, council asked for staff to put together, for lack of a better term, an inventory of undeveloped parcels that were zoned for office. Is that still in process?
We're still, we're continuing to work on that. This was predominantly an office designation. That is correct.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions for myself, so I'm going to put it out one more time. If any of the board members have any other questions, I'll kind of go through the list just so we do this orderly. Don, do you have any other questions for staff?
No, sure don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mary Jo, any other questions?
No further questions.
Thank you. Steve, any other additional follow-up questions?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Jessica Pearson, do you have any additional questions?
Nope, none for me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Jessica McClure, any questions?
No additional questions. Thanks.
All right, thank you. And I don't have any other questions that haven't come up in the last 30 seconds. So, all right. So would anybody like to make a motion on 19 REZ Dillinger rezoning? I think that we'll have the motions in front of us. And once we have a motion on the floor, just to remind folks, and particularly folks at home, before we can start any discussion, we want to have a motion on the floor so we know from whence we're having a conversation. So would anybody care to make a motion on this rezoning case?
I'll make a motion.
Mary Jo?
Okay, I move that the board find case number 19 REZ 17 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Is there a second?
I'll be glad to second. Steve.
Steve, okay, Mary Jo and Steve with a second. Thank you. So let's start off a discussion. Mary Jo, we'll start with you.
Well, this is obviously a very complex project for so many reasons, that many of which or some of which are outside of the control of the applicant. But it seems that with the adjustments that they've made in terms of reducing a little bit the number of dwelling units, understanding that there is a tremendous amount of activity going on in that area, and it's a busy intersection, but as you pointed out earlier, also a destination center, which makes this project, including some office space, probably a pretty good fit for this. I'm intrigued by the massive amount of water, what do you call it? The,
Wetlands?
it's where it's crossed by the
Stream buffer.
stream buffer. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Which makes it pretty difficult to work within a triangle space. And I think they've done the best they could do with what they've got there as well as trying to mitigate some of the traffic implications in that vicinity. So for those reasons, I think it really is, there's nothing else you could do with that besides what has been proposed. So I'm in favor. That's all I have.
Steve, do you have any comments to make on you seconded the motion, so I'm going to let you go at next.
Okay, just a couple of comments. I think this really is consistent with the plan that's out there today. I mean, we've talked so much in other cases about losing office space, and that's really not the situation here. I don't really think this is a problem fitting into the destination center designation for this area. And I'm going to continue to trust our town council to deal with the parking issues once the study is released. So I think this is a fair use of the parcel, the way that it's been laid out tonight.
Okay, thanks, Steve. All right, I'll go through the rest of the Planning and Zoning Board for your discussion and comments. Don, you're next.
I have no further comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Don, do you support the motion that's on the floor, just out of curiosity?
I sure do. Yes, I think it's an ideal setup for a destination center.
Okay, thank you. Jessica Pearson. Comments, discussion.
Opposed by Mary Jo. I think, sorry, can you hear me?
I can. Yes, Jessica.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I support it mainly because of staff's very detailed presentation and walking us through all of the way that the site has been looked at by the applicant, and that it is consistent with all of those different chapters within the Imagine Cary plan. So that I am going to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Jessica McClure? Comments for discussion?
I support it similar to Mary Jo. I think with the lot size and shape that you have with the buffers and DOT coming in, there's only so much you can do, but I think the transition from multifamily and then office and townhomes down south is about as close as you can get from a decent transition. You know, I can appreciate the traffic calming measures with the raised intersection and the raised crosswalks, trying to, you know, deter folks from using that as a cut through or things like that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll offer my comments. I think it has a lot of great elements, what the applicant is proposing. And I appreciate that a lot of work has gone in and understanding what they're dealing with in terms of with DOT, making some significant changes at the interchange there. I appreciate their efforts to put in the traffic calming for the two greenway crossings as well as the intersection. I think they'll help alleviate a lot of the concerns that were there about becoming a cut-through street. But on all, what falls short for me is when I read in the Cary plan, the community plan about, what we're looking for in destination centers, there's not enough detail. I'm missing something that gives me that, yes, this is that, that high quality character that we're looking for. For me, this is just a development where start out with 300 units of multifamily, and that's a lot of units on a piece of property, along with potentially 4,000 square feet of office and the townhomes, et cetera. And I appreciate the work that's been done, so far on the preliminary plan that was presented to us. But it doesn't quite hit the mark for me in this case. And I'm not going to vote in favor of the motion. And I just felt as though there was a bar that didn't quite get reached. I think that there's too much multifamily on this site. I think there's, particularly in light of the rest of the area around. I appreciate the comment that the applicant's representative made, Mr. Barron, about, it's been sitting here, nobody's built office, et cetera, but I'm also concerned about, as we look at the destination center, is a multifamily project which is going to really raise the quality of this area. I'm not sure it does. So I'm going to vote in favor. And I also just want to make one comment, and I appreciate all the effort that the applicant has made in trying to address issues, particularly when some concerns about environmental issues were raised, and the issues about adding some charging stations and recycling and LED lighting. But I have to say, in a former life, I was involved in certifying over 150 multifamily developments for a variety of different green building programs. So 150 units, 150 projects throughout the Southeast, market rate for LEED, National Green Building Standard, et cetera. And so although I appreciate the effort, it falls short on my mark of saying that we're trying to do something that's environmentally sound. I've seen some other projects, and this is just more of a commentary, some other projects that have come before and things that were added at council where I really felt it felt short of the mark in terms of some efforts, in terms of trying to improve the quality of the product that's being built. So with that, that's my feeling on the project. So with that, I'm going to call on each of you to state your vote. For the records, we'll do a verbal vote. Don Hamilton.
Aye.
Mary Jo Hill.
Aye.
Steve Crutchfield.
Aye.
Jessica Pearson.
Aye.
Jessica McClure.
Aye.
And I am going to vote in no. So that passes 5-1 by my count. Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is 19 REZ 29 Lily Atkins rezoning. Principal planner Katie Dry will share the staff's presentation, then we'll hear from the applicant. Following the applicant's remarks, all board members will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff or the applicant. Ms. Dry, you may proceed.
Good evening, Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Board. This is a request to apply initial zoning to properties near the intersection of Lily Atkins Road and Holly Springs Road. The site consists of 5 parcels, each between 5 to 10 acres in size. 4 were part of the Woodhaven subdivision, subdivided in 1977. The site does not include the 5-acre parcel at the Holly Springs and Lily Atkins Road intersection. Because the site is not in Cary's corporate limits or in the ETJ, there is an owner-initiated annexation associated with this case. And although the Planning and Zoning Board does not typically review annexation requests, I'd like to give a brief explanation because of rezoning implications. So the site is shown here in pink. It looks like a satellite annexation, but it's not because there is the state-owned property that's between the site and Cary's corporate limits. The state-owned property is shown here in green. It's called intervening property, and it can be used to become contiguous. This is not an uncommon practice, and it's a standard part of annexations. However, we frequently see it with intervening property when there's state-owned right-of-way involved. So therefore, if the Town Council annexes and rezones the Lily Atkins site, the NCDOT parcel will automatically be annexed, as provided by state law. Zoning would also need to be applied, but you would see that at a later date. We also note that if the Lily Atkins rezoning does not move forward for any reason, the annexation of the Lily Atkins site and the NCDOT parcel would also not move forward. A portion of the Lily Atkins rezoning site is within the floodplain. The site's also impacted by stream buffers. The property to the south, which is the NCDOT parcel, is entirely within the floodplain. Because the site's within Wake County, the current zoning is R40 watershed, and the proposed zoning is transitional residential conditional use. Conditions include limiting the use to detached dwellings and neighborhood recreation, a maximum density of 2 units per acre, an age restriction so that at least 80% of the dwellings will have at least one resident who's 55 or older, minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. This exceeds the minimum required by the LDO for the TR zoning district, which is 5,000 square feet. Lot area will not include area within a riparian buffer. This is also above and beyond the requirements of the LDO and state law. State law requires that the town must count abutting areas within a stream buffer as part of lot area. So this condition will ensure that the entire lot and area within will be outside of any stream buffers. Side yard setbacks will be a minimum aggregate side yard of 9 feet with a minimum of 3 feet on one side. Community gathering space will be a minimum of 2 acres. This exceeds the minimum required by the LDO, which is 5,000 square feet. There will be 2.25 acres of central open space area, and there will be turn lanes at site entrances on Holly Springs Road. This condition's in yellow because it was added following the public hearing for the site. The applicant has also submitted a concept plan as a zoning condition. The plan shows general areas for uses, buffers, open space, and entrances. Area in yellow will allow detached dwellings. The center area in light green represents open space. There are 2 community gathering areas totaling 2 acres. 2 full movement access points, one on Lily Atkins Road and one on Holly Springs Road. The western and the southern portion of the development will remain undeveloped. It's impacted by floodplains, stream buffers, and wetlands. Staff's review of the Imagine Cary community plan finds that policies from the Live, Engage, Shape, and Move chapters are applicable. The site is located on the edge of the traditional neighborhood designation. The Cary community plan describes traditional neighborhoods by having large master plan communities with some degree of housing mix, although single-family homes are the predominant land use type. Traditional neighborhoods can have a moderate amount of small lot single-family, patio homes, townhomes, multifamily housing, but these tend to be sited in discrete pods. The applicant's proposing a maximum density of 2 units per acre, and this could yield up to 76 lots. The traditional neighborhood designation envisions that small lot single-family uses could be allowed in moderate amounts, but also notes that they tend to be sited in discrete pods or sections. So this site could be considered a pod, however, it does not include the 5-acre property at Lily Atkins Road and Holly Springs Road, or the 2 large lots directly to the west of the site along Lily Atkins Road. According to the Live chapter, Policy 2 speaks to the provision of more housing choices for all residents to accommodate a diverse mix of household sizes and ages. It also encourages adequate supply of housing suitable for Cary's diversity of household types. Staff's analysis finds that the Lily Atkins rezoning condition proposing the age restriction will help to address policy guidance on senior populations. The Swift Creek Greenway corridor traverses the site, and it's shown here on this map. Dedication of greenway easements will be required at the time of development plan review. According to the Move chapter, Lily Atkins Road is a 2-lane thoroughfare and Holly Springs Road is a 6-lane thoroughfare. Anticipated site traffic is 33 a.m. and 39 p.m. peak hour trips. This falls below the threshold for a traffic study, which is 100 peak hour trips. Therefore, a traffic study was not required. The applicant voluntarily completed a traffic analysis due to traffic-related concerns expressed at the neighborhood meeting, and upon seeking staff's review, the analysis was revised in October of 2020, and it includes the following findings. The site traffic is not expected to degrade the level of service on the Holly Springs Road and Lily Atkins intersection. Turn lanes into the site allow traffic to shift out of through lanes to maintain continuous traffic flow on Holly Springs Road. Existing peak hour congestion on Holly Springs Road is due to existing situations. The traffic study also notes the future projects in the area will help to improve traffic, and that includes the new NC 540 Triangle Expressway interchange slated to open in 2022, the eventual widening of Holly Springs Road, and NCDOT intersection improvement projects, notably at Holly Springs Road and Southeast Cary Parkway, and Holly Springs Road and Penny Road. There was a neighborhood meeting in February of last year in 2020. Nearly 100 nearby property owners attended the meeting. Questions and concerns included traffic, stormwater and flooding, environmental and wildlife impacts, number of units, questions about whether they would be age restricted, cut through traffic on Holly Springs Road into Lily Atkins Road, and then questions about the potential for a traffic signal at Holly Springs Road and Lily Atkins Road. Following the neighborhood meeting, the applicant held 3 additional virtual meetings, and staff has received emails and calls throughout the duration of this rezoning process. At the remote public hearing on January 28, 2021, there were 79 public hearing comments submitted in writing, and there were 3 call-in speakers. Comments shared at the public hearing included concerns regarding environmental impacts, wildlife preservation, wildlife corridors, traffic on Holly Springs Road, and concerns over traffic or cut-through traffic on Lily Atkins Road, impact to drinking water, impervious surface limitations, concern over the density, that it's too high, was concern over floodplain, stormwater, the use of pesticides, and that senior housing at this site would be too far from services and that it should be closer to downtown Cary. Council comments included a note that senior housing and the density that's proposed may have less of an impact on traffic compared to other uses that could be proposed for this site. Council members noted that there was no buffer reductions being requested for this location, that it's near environmentally sensitive areas, and also noted that nearby residents have expressed concerns regarding flooding in the area, as well as concern regarding traffic on Holly Springs Road and cut-through traffic on Lily Atkins Road. Since the public hearing, the applicant has committed to adding turn lanes at their site entrance on Holly Springs Road, which is shown with the red circle. The design and the location of the entrance would be subject to NCDOT and Town of Cary approval at the time of development plan review. Staff's preliminary recommendation or finding is that policies from the Live, Engage, Shape, and Move chapters are applicable. We note that the case furthers the Live and Shape policies by providing small lot senior housing options. Is partially consistent with the traditional neighborhood. It could be considered a pod, but we also note that the assemblage does not include certain parcels, which would help with that transition. And so questions for the board could be, is the use and the density appropriate at this location? Are the zoning conditions appropriate to address site impacts? This concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's representative, Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group, is here to speak to the case. Mr. Barron, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Dry. Good evening again, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Jason Barron with Morningstar Law Group, representing the applicant in this case. Joining me on this call is Mr. Ed Tang with Withers and Ravenel, who's provided land planning and engineering for this proposal. In addition, Mr. Todd Brooks of Dewberry is available to answer questions related to the traffic study that's been presented as part of this case. And I want to start with where Ms. Dry ended, and that was the 2 questions that the board should consider associated with the case. And the first is the use and density appropriate in this location? And the second is it appropriately conditioned to mitigate offsite impacts? And we believe unquestionably the answers to those questions are yes. First, with respect to the use and the density, as noted on the screen in front of you, it's a maximum of 2 dwelling units per acre, which under all circumstances is a low density development, especially with what we're seeing being developed today. And, you know, is the use appropriate? It is a single family detached residential product. It's not townhomes. It is not a multifamily development, again, which we're seeing a significant amount of multifamily development developed, especially in this area, in this district. And so we believe the use and the density are appropriate for this location. And the use and the density being appropriate for this location is further reinforced by the fact that this is an age-restricted residential community. This is a 55 and over residential community that's going to be located at, essentially on the periphery of one of Cary's oldest and most well thought out planned developments, and that is Lockmere. And it's going to be located at a place where there aren't other available options for age-restricted multifamily dwellings. And so we believe from an appropriateness of use standpoint, having the availability of age-restricted housing, 55 and older, for folks who are currently living in Lockmere, which is, as you folks are aware, is a very sizable residential community, having that available option for them right around the corner. They still get to live in this area. They still get to go to places that they enjoy going to, whether it's the Harris Teeter or Craft. I live in this area, so I know it incredibly well, but it provides for kind of age-in-place opportunities in an area that is lacking age-in-place opportunities, again, recognizing that Lockmere is an incredibly sizable single-family detached community primarily. So we think the density is low. We think the location is ideal for a use of this type. With respect to the question of is it appropriately conditioned to offset impacts, I want to start with traffic. As was noted in the staff report, the traffic report, the town doesn't require a TAR in this instance because the threshold of 100 peak hour trips is nowhere remotely triggered by a residential community of this density with this age-restricted use. Age-restricted housing is a very low traffic generator during the peak hours compared to its single-family detached market residential communities. And so, this is going to have a very, very, very low traffic impact. In fact, as was noted in Mrs. Dry's presentation and in the staff report, it's 33 a.m. peak hour trips and 39 p.m. peak hour trips. Again, that is a very low traffic impact in any circumstance, certainly for single family detached, which on average from a residential standpoint generates on a per unit basis more trips per unit than the other residential categories, just given the fact that they typically come with school age children and all of the things that go with that. And so traffic is something that my client has heard a lot about in this case. And in fact, and the second thing I want to talk about is community outreach related to whether this is conditioned appropriately to address impacts. As was noted in the staff report, we had a town-required neighborhood meeting actually pre-pandemic, and shortly after that, we started the pandemic in March. And then we took it upon ourselves to have 3 additional community meetings to help the community understand exactly what was going on here, to help them understand that it is an age-restricted community. Actually, when it went to neighborhood meeting back in January of 2020, it wasn't an age-restricted community. It was being considered for one. That condition was actually added following the initial neighborhood meeting for this case. Additionally, the community outreach included helping the community understand what this case was and was not. There was some confusion associated with what was going to be developed as part of the community and what was not going to be developed. And so that was a big part of what we tried to help them understand. And the last thing, and really the 2 overarching concerns that we've heard associated with this case from the community relate to traffic, which we believe is the easiest answer to support approving this case, given the tremendously low traffic that is generated with the use of this nature, and also environmental impacts. That's the second issue that has kind of bubbled to the top in terms of concerns associated with development of this use. And I would tell you that on the environmental side, we spent a lot of time, and Mr. Tang put together what I thought was a very thoughtful presentation, helping the community understand what has changed. And this slide doesn't show you, but there are a lot of folks whose homes currently flood during high water incidents in this area. To the west of this site, there are folks who are experiencing challenges when high water events occur. And the reason why, and this is unfortunate, but their homes were platted at a time when you could plat lots into the floodway and into the floodplain. And there are a large number of homes that are platted in that manner. As you can see with the slide in front of you, that green area essentially represents all of the areas that can't be developed and ensures that what is going to be developed on this site is not going to be subject to the same existing constraints that those homes that were built far, years before this one were, that they are currently experiencing. Two more points on the environmental impacts. This site is actually downstream rather than upstream from them. And so any runoff concerns associated with this site aren't impacting them directly because they are moving their way through Swift Creek before they get to those properties. So those properties are actually draining towards this site. And then the last point I'll make with respect to environmental impacts, and this board is very aware of it, the town took it upon themselves about a year ago to really be trailblazers in terms of stormwater requirements for new development in the Triangle region, candidly, by requiring not just the 2 and the 10-year storm, but also the 100-year storm being studied as part of the process. That is a significant stormwater requirement that certainly didn't exist for the development of the balance of the community in this area, but should give assurance to folks in this area that stormwater being generated by the site is going to be treated and detained and appropriately with those very stringent requirements that the town has. And so I wanted to touch on those. I know my time is limited. I'm here to answer any questions, but I do want to share with you our team's opinion that this is an appropriate location for this use at this density. It adds to the growing need for senior housing. We have a tremendous need, and it's not getting any better. It's getting worse by the day. It is adjacent to Lockmere, so it's going to provide the opportunity for folks who live in Lockmere to be able to age in place. And it's going to do so in a way that is going to have as minimal an impact on the very challenged Holly Springs Road traffic situation that exists today. And as somebody who lives on Holly Springs Road, I'm a big fan for keeping traffic off of Holly Springs Road. And this development does about as good a job as you're going to in that regard. And so with that, we would respectfully request you all's support for the case and a finding of consistency with the Cary Community Plan, and are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barron, for your presentations on this case. So now we will follow up presentations with questions. So I'm going to ask each board member to share any questions you may have for either the staff or the applicant. Don, I'll start off with you. Don, any questions for the staff or applicant?
Just a couple, and they're both for staff. And I may have overlooked this in past cases, but the side lot setback of 9 feet and then the 3 feet, I haven't heard those terms before. Is that consistent with what the town requires?
It's a little above what the town requires. Cary's ordinance for the TR zoning district has a 0 to 3 minimum side yard setback and a 6-foot aggregate side yard setback. So they've increased that aggregate side yard from 6 to 9. And then they set the minimum as 3 feet on one side.
Great. I appreciate that. And this is an odd one. What liability does this board have or the town have if we move forward with this and there are federally protected wildlife in that area without looking into that first? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I believe it does. And I'll invite any of my other coworkers who may have some experience in this to chime in as well. But that, any federally protected wildlife would be outside of, the regulations of what the town could consider, and would have to go to the proper, regulatory authority, which, could be, at the federal level.
And yes, Don, this is Lisa Glover. There would be no liability for the town, so that would be a responsibility of whoever develops the property ultimately to make sure that they're complying with all local, state, and federal, laws and rules and regulations. So the town approving the rezoning would not adversely affect the town in that way.
Great, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Don. Mary Jo, any questions for staff or applicant?
I'm just, for the applicant, I'm curious about just why this was determined for or suggested property for the age restricted. What makes it special? Obviously, the traffic is a big impact, but I'm just curious about the rationale for how that was decided.
Sure, and I think a lot of it has to do, Mary Jo, with the fact that this site it bears such close proximity to Lockmere, and you know, being able to provide the benefit of, you know, essentially a captive audience of potential buyers who, when they decide to sell their 4,500 square foot house and want to move down to something smaller, they're going to be able to do so in a way that doesn't displace them from this community entirely. And they're going to be, you know, be able to do so in a way that allows them to continue, again, going to the places that they've always enjoyed going to. They don't have to go there, of course, but it gives them the option of doing so. And I think you're touching on a good point, maybe indirectly, and that is, you know, this is a 55 and older community. And so, you know, this is not a retirement home by any stretch of the imagination. This is an active adult community. So these are folks who still, you know, are out and about. They're just not out and about at a time where you're going to be impacting traffic during the peak hour. You know, still, again, so it's kind of what the market would consider an active adult community. So really, the proximity to Lockmere is a great option. And then, you know, it's only, you know, 1.5 to 2 miles away from the vast majority of crossroads.
Yeah, I realize it's a very convenient area right there on Holly Springs. So it's really envisioned as a community. It's not going to be a bunch of individual homeowners that choose to stick a house of their own choosing or design in these lots.
Yeah, so this is proposed to be developed by a developer builder called Applicant Communities. This is the vast majority of what they do is they develop 55 and older communities. Again, it's for folks who, you know, make the decision that they don't want to live in a traditional residential community because they don't want to be next to the home that has the kid out playing basketball at 9 o'clock or whatever the case may be. And some people find that great, and other people decide that they don't want to be exposed to that anymore. So a large part of what Epcon does in the markets they operate in, and they've done a lot of work in this area, what they do is they cater to folks who are looking for a community of like-minded folks, but still want to live in a single-family detached dwelling and kind of, you know, function in that capacity.
I understand. Okay, that gives me a better appreciation for it. I don't have any other questions. I think it's pretty well defined.
Dan, I
Dan,
think
you're
you're
muted.
muted. Did you call on me, Jessica Pearson?
I apologize. No, I did not. I apologize. I muted myself. I was calling for Steve Crutchfield. Jessica, you'll be up next.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Crutchfield.
Really quick, I don't have any questions. This looks like a good fit for me, and I'm going to find myself very supportive of it.
Great. Okay, thanks, Steve. Jessica, any questions? Pearson.
I don't have any questions. I appreciate staff's thorough presentation and the applicant's comments as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Jessica McClure, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just two quick ones. One, I think for the applicant, and then one probably for staff. As far as continuity and this site, was it looked at grabbing the properties to the east and west? Or was that just not in it for this plan?
Yeah, I mean, and so it's certainly not in it for this plan is the easiest answer I can provide you. You know, the practical answer is folks can either sell their property or not at a price that they think makes sense or not. And sometimes you have motivated sellers and sometimes you have unmotivated sellers. And it's really just a product of what can we get, and can we get enough to be able to make an authentic community? And I think Epcon feels good about that. And they also kind of like the idea of being able to establish a placeholder. The plan that's in front of you shows that there's going to be a cross access provided for the benefit of that site to the east. They had active conversations with that owner. He's just not quite ready to sell.
Great, excellent, thanks. One more question as far as the trail crossing across Holly Springs Road. Is the town responsible for that grade separation, I would assume?
Yes, the town would be responsible for that, and that would occur at a later date. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, thank Jessica. I have a few questions. One deals with, I think it was on slide 56 that there was discussion on road widening for DOT. Thank you. So the widening of Holly Springs Road and the two, is there a timing on that? From the staff perspective, is there, I mean, is that this decade, next decade, you know, 3 campo studies, 3 campo cycles from now? I mean, I don't know. I just.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Priyatham Kanda to chime in on that one.
So for the widening of Holly Springs Road, unfortunately, there's no timing. We look at it as development occurs along Holly Springs Road, you know, they would do their part in widening it to half the street section. The opening of 540 could open some other opportunities and funding opportunities for improving Holly Springs Road here and there, but at this time, there is no specific timeline.
Okay, so on that, kind of keeping on that just question, is the applicant proposed some traffic upgrades, which I appreciate very much on Holly Springs Road, basically both from the north and the south. So as I envision that, what they're, if you're going north on Holly Springs, it'll be basically a center turn lane, if I understand that correctly. And going south, it'd be basically a turn lane for right turn in. So they'll do those regardless. So they'll do those improvements to basically a DOT standard with the land that they have available to them. In other words, they have to work with the land that they own on the west side of Holly Springs to make that, because they've got to basically create a lane that's not there now. But
yeah. That is correct. You know, the development, once it goes to development plan review, would also be required to widen their frontage to 1/2 of a 6-lane section. So that opens up additional room for a potential a future median. So they'll be using that to create the left turn lane, and the right turn lane that they would be creating into the site would be in addition.
okay. All right, so thank you. So yeah, all right. So because it's already been designated as a 6-lane that they've got on their half, on their side of the road, they have to develop it to that standard. Okay, thank you. One other question just for staff, and I should know this, but I don't. So I'm going to ask the question. When we see a development like this, or any of the developments that come before us, the larger, is there a requirement for an environmental impact study like under NEPA requirements?
Not in association with the rezoning process.
Not associated with the rezoning. What about when they file for site plan at permitting process, at permitting?
Now, Cary does not have an environmental impact study requirement for development in Cary. Depending on extent of stream and wetland impacts, there may be separate federal processes that applicants need to go through, but that would be outside the town's purview.
Okay, so that would be if they're in, okay, if they're in a FEMA designated floodplain or stream designation, something like that. Okay. So one other question on that, kind of somewhat related. So this parcel to the south is owned by DOT. And if this goes through, that parcel would then be annexed by, I guess, because it's the continuity to this site, or whatever the term would be, but it'd still be owned by DOT,
Yes.
even though it didn't fall within the Cary's boundaries. And DOT will do as DOT does. Okay.
That's correct. And then a zoning would be assigned at a later date. So you would be, if this gets approved, you would be seeing that DOT property at a later date to assign a zoning to it.
I just have to ask the question, is there any insight from DOT as to what their plans are for that piece of property, which to me seems like, I'll just call it what it is. It's a lot of swampland.
Yeah, I believe it was purchased for stream mitigation for prior DOT road projects. I don't believe they have any intention to do anything with it.
Okay, just to leave it as stream mitigation. So is that basically they bought it as kind of as an offset for?
Right, DOT used to do its own mitigation banking where they would acquire and protect stream buffers and wetlands. They don't do it that way anymore, but at the time they purchased this property, that was one way that they were offsetting impacts.
Okay, so this was more of an offset. Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. I appreciate the clarification from staff. All right, if there are no other questions, I'll just pause for a second. Are there any other questions? I won't go through the roll call, but somebody can speak up if they want to. Hearing none, I will move forward. Would somebody like to make a motion, excuse me, on 19 REZ 29, Lily Atkins rezoning? And I believe your option will be in front of you. Anybody care to make a motion?
And this is Steve. I'll be glad to make a motion.
Okay, Steve?
I move that the board find case number 19 REZ 29 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Thank you. Is there a second on the motion?
I'll second, Mary Jo.
Thank you, Mary Jo. All right, so we have a motion and a second to move this case forward. So let's move on for discussion. Steve, I'll let you start off as you made the motion.
Sure, thank you. I think we continue to need senior housing in Cary, so this definitely hits the live section, I think, very strongly. You know, services aren't always an issue for seniors. Aging in place is also very important. So I don't think the service is as important. Not all seniors want to live downtown or anything like that. I think putting senior housing here has a lot less impact on the surrounding area. We've approved a number of cases for this applicant, and I think this one merits that we continue to do so. And again, this stops, I think, you know, a multifamily going in here, which to me would be more difficult for the surrounding neighborhoods. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Mary Jo, comments?
I agree with what Steve just said, that this is a much more appropriate use than others that you might imagine. And the fact that it is adjacent to a very well-established neighborhood. So it's a very safe and accessible area of the corner of the Lockmere subdivisions, or whatever the overall PUD used to be called. Yeah, and then obviously you have to work within the constraints of the available property. So, but it doesn't seem that that's going to be an issue with the accessibility to both Lily Atkins and Holly Springs roads in terms of access. So I think it's a good layout and a worthy project.
Okay, thanks, Mary Jo. So let me go through for the rest of the board, any comments on as we're going through discussion. Don Hamilton?
No comments. I agree with everything that's been said, and I support this one.
Okay, thanks, Don. Jessica Pearson?
Yeah, I would like to say that I think the use is appropriate. It is single family detached residential. It's a low density. And I agree with my fellow board members' comments who proposed the motion and seconded. So I also am planning to support the motion.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Jessica McClure, comments for discussion?
Keep it short and sweet. I pretty much agree with everybody across the board on this one. So.
Okay. All right, thanks. Well, I agree with everybody, so I will also vote in favor of this. I just do want to make a couple of comments. One is, you know, I spent some time yesterday driving around all three sites, and my visceral reaction to this one was, oh no, you know, we can't do anything. You know, leave it pristine as to the wetlands, and I appreciate that sentiment. And you know, you know, altruistically, that's what I'd like to do. But land use planning law doesn't necessarily allow that. The law, which goes back to the Magna Carta, in terms of, you know, the opportunity to be able to make use of land. But, you know, I think of all the things that could be done, this may have some of the lowest impact. I like, you know, the design that was there. If you look at the other developments, not that we're talking about land use, but the reality is if you look at other developments that the same developer has done, assuming they do develop this piece of parcel. It's of high quality. I think it fits well for the active over 55. I hate to call it senior housing. It's just an active, over 55 community. And, I appreciate the comments that were made by the public about the amenity. It's still, we're spoiled here in Cary, so the amenities may be 1.5 miles versus, a half a mile, but they're still close. I think they have really tried to do some things that are contextually, within, I think they recognize the context in which they're developing with the streams, the woodlands, et cetera, and I think it'll be a good development. I do actually have a comment for the applicant's representative, from Mr. Barron. He kept referencing Lockmere and people in Lockmere moving there. I didn't see a condition where it's exclusively for Lockmere, so some of us on this board who may be qualified may want to find ourselves living a little further outside of town. I hope we're not excluded from that. But needless to say, yeah, I'll also vote in affirmative. So with that, let's move on, because I know we have.
Mr. McFarland, I'm
Yes.
sorry to interrupt you, but just for this case, because it's been brought up a few times, I just want to remind the board that the identity of the applicant should not be a factor in your vote, as the ultimate developer of the property could always change. So I know we've had a little bit of discussion tonight about who the developer might be, but as you're voting, actually don't rely on that information.
Well, as I referenced, that they may not be the ultimate developer. They're the ones just bringing the case before us, and so we're looking at the appropriate land use. Thank you for that reminder, Lisa. So I'll call on each of you to state your vote. So I'll go down the list. Don Hamilton.
Aye.
And Mary Jo Hill.
Aye.
Steve Crutchfield.
Aye.
Jessica Pearson.
Aye.
Jessica McClure.
Aye.
And I vote in the affirmative as well, so it passes unanimously, 6-0. Thank you very much, staff and the applicant's representative, Mr. Barron.
Thank
All
you
right,
all.
moving on to the last item on our agenda tonight, which is 20 REZ03, the Twin Lakes PDD Amendment MU3. The principal planner, Katie Dry, will share the staff's presentation, then we'll hear from the applicant. Following the applicant's remarks, all board members will have an opportunity to ask questions of the staff or the applicant. Ms. Dry, you may proceed.
All right, this is a request to amend a portion of the Twin Lakes Plan Development District to allow 230 multifamily units. The 5.6 acre site is located at 10,152 Lake Road Boulevard. The property fronts Davis Drive, Hatches Pond Lane, and Lake Road Boulevard. The image shown here is a view of the property frontage on Davis Drive. Along portions of the northern and southern property lines, the site is adjacent to Morrisville's jurisdiction. Cary's limits are shown in gold and Morrisville's in blue. The zoning is Planned Development District Major. The Twin Lakes PDD is a 300-acre project that was originally approved in 2004. Within Twin Lakes, there were 9 residential tracts and 5 mixed-use parcels, also known as MU parcels. The request before you tonight is for the site labeled MU3S or MU3 South. The tracts MU2 and MU3 North were recently developed with a Wegmans grocery store, several inline tenants, and the Overture Senior Apartments. The MU tracts have a shared allotment for uses, and this includes commercial, office, institutional, and residential multifamily. This rezoning would remove the MU3 South parcel from the shared use allowance, and it would limit it to 230 multifamily units. This slide shows the allowed and the remaining allocation for shared uses for the MU parcels. MU2 was developed with Twin Lakes, and it used 115,000 square feet of retail, 2,800 square feet of office, and 8,650 square feet of restaurant. The remaining undeveloped parcels range in size from 1 to 1.7 acres, and they total just over 4 acres. So the parcels have a zoning entitlement to develop with the remaining allotment, which is up to 135,000 square feet of retail, 107,000 square feet of office, is 16,000 square feet of restaurant. There's also an allowance for 50 multifamily units and assisted living units. But due to the size and shape of these remaining lots, it's unlikely that actual yield would be that high. Proposed elements of this rezoning include a use of 230 multifamily units maximum, alternative streetscapes on Davis Drive and Lake Grove Boulevard, community gathering space of 7,500 square feet, building height max of 70 feet, parking at 1.45 spaces per unit, and 50% of the parking will be in structure parking decks. A commitment to construct the greenway from Lake Grove Boulevard to Airport Road, exclusive of wetlands or stream crossings, and the recreation fund payment will not be required. Architectural standards include increasing the masonry to 40% masonry for buildings fronting Davis Drive and Lake Grove Boulevard, adding transparency requirements and limitations on blank walls, prohibiting vinyl siding and non-decorative concrete masonry units, building articulation requirements. Buildings exceeding 120 feet in length will have horizontal modulations, a requirement that at least 75% of the residential building balconies will be a minimum depth of 5 feet. There will also be roof form and articulation requirements. Because the site is a PDD, alternative standards from the LDO may be proposed. The original PDD allowed a 20 to 30 foot wide streetscape for this location. We know that original plan contemplated vertical mixed use here. And today the applicant's proposing a 30 foot wide streetscape averaged along Davis Drive. They've indicated that this could be increased to 50 feet in width if there's parking in between the building and Davis Drive. So they're offering an increase from the current approved streetscape for Twin Lakes, but this is also a change in use with this rezoning. And so it's a deviation from the LDO requirement for a 50 foot wide residential streetscape. The applicant has offered an alternative streetscape planting, which is above the previously approved Twin Lakes PDD, but again, it's below the LDO requirements for a standard type A planting standard. The rezoning also proposes the following streetscape elements: residential stoops to encroach up to 10 feet, pedestrian access and fences. They're also proposing an increased planting height and caliber inches at the time of planting. On Lake Grove Boulevard, the applicants propose a 25 foot wide average streetscape. This is a 5 foot reduction from the LDO requirement for 30 feet. Similar to the streetscape on Davis, the applicant has offered conditions to address the reduced width. The streetscape will be planted to a type A standard. Proposed streetscape elements will include residential stoops will be allowed to encroach up to 10 feet. Pedestrian access, fences, and other elements will be allowed within the streetscape. And there will be an increased planting height and caliber inches at the time of planting. Regarding buffers, the applicants propose that if the property to the north is developed in conjunction with the site, no buffer will be required. If not developed with the site, then a buffer will be required per the LDO. The PDD proposes a 20 foot wide buffer adjacent to the properties to the south. This is consistent with the LDO standards. The LDO would also regulate the buffer to the east, and per the LDO, no buffer would be required if that area is developed with open space. The applicants are seeking to disturb and replant 100% of the buffer to the south. We note this is a deviation from Cary standards. To offset this deviation, the applicant has proposed to increase the plantings above and beyond the LDO standards. The parking ratio of 1.45 spaces per unit is a reduction to Cary's LDO requirements. The applicant's justification letter states this is a 37% reduction. However, staff notes the percentage of the reduction may vary based on the breakdown of the bedrooms in each unit. The applicant's justification letter does provide an estimated breakdown of the number of 1, 2, or 3 bedroom units, but this has not been committed to through a zoning condition. And board, as you are aware, Cary's working with a consultant to study the parking needs for multifamily developments in Cary. While the study is not yet complete, We note the proposed parking reduction in this case is within the range of industry and surrounding municipalities' parking standards, if the development's built with the estimated breakdown of bedrooms per unit as shown in their justification letter. A minimum of 50% of the parking will be within parking structures, and the applicant has proposed that any portion of the parking deck along the southern property line that is not wrapped will screen the ramps with horizontal elements. Staff's review of the Cary Community Plan finds that policies from the Live, Work, Engage, Shape, and Move chapters are applicable. Policy 2 focuses on expanding housing choices townwide. This proposal would add to the mixture of housing types in the immediate area. Current GIS data for the properties within a half mile of the subject site indicate that housing currently consists of 58% detached dwellings, 29% townhouses, and 13% multifamily units. The Future Growth Framework map designates this area as a commercial center, which are generally described as being anchored by a grocery store or an equivalent. They can have residential, office, or institutional uses within the commercial center. The proposed multifamily use would increase the overall mix within the Twin Lakes PDD, but if this is approved, it would certainly limit other uses such as office within the commercial center. When we zoom out a bit, we can see the entire limits of this commercial center. You can see it includes the Airport Boulevard and Davis Drive intersection. It totals around 80 acres. And again, commercial centers do allow for multifamily as incidental uses. We did look at the breakdown of uses within this commercial center when it comes to multifamily. We found that about 8% of the area is designated for multifamily at this moment. And if this rezoning was approved, that percentage would increase to 15%. So that's still within the threshold of what could be considered incidental. The commercial center designation provides guidance not only for use, but it looks at the design and character of developments as well. So stating the development should create a compact and walkable environment, and that walkability can be enhanced by limiting the use of surface parking so that buildings can be sited close to each other. The proposed rezoning commits to 50% structure parking, and this directly addresses this policy of the commercial center. The plan also notes that commercial centers should have ample landscaping, including both natural green spaces and formal public gathering areas, and that considerable attention be paid to building and site design. And staff finds that this site is partially consistent with this policy guidance. The proposal will reduce the streetscapes and clear and grade streetscapes and buffers. The site is also proposing additional community gathering area as well as certain architectural standards. Looking at the Engage chapter, we note the site's directly adjacent to a future Town of Cary neighborhood park. Land for the park was dedicated with the original Twin Lakes PDD. Because of this prior dedication and wording in the approved Twin Lakes PDD document, the developer of the existing Twin Lakes PDD was not required to pay the recreation fee for multifamily units. With this PDD, the applicant is seeking a similar approach and asking not to be required to pay the recreation fee. Staff notes, however, the rezoning would add 204 residential units to the overall PDD for Twin Lakes, which was not contemplated with the original approval in 2005. The site is also adjacent to the Twin Lakes Greenway corridor and loop trail. The applicant has committed to construct the western alignment of the Greenway, generally extending approximately 3,000 feet from Lake Road Boulevard north to Airport Boulevard, but excluding wetlands and stream crossings. There is an existing 10-foot wide street-side trail along Lake Road Boulevard and Airport Boulevard, to which the proposed Greenway will connect. And we note that the completion of this Greenway would complete an important connection to the Hatcher Creek Greenway in Morrisville, which ties to the Crabtree Greenway to the north. A virtual neighborhood meeting for the rezoning was held on July 15th of 2020. There were 6 nearby property owners who participated. Comments included questions about traffic impacts and why a traffic study was not required, Comparisons in size and height to the Overture site, which is directly to the north and currently under construction, and concerns regarding cut-through traffic in adjacent neighborhoods. The remote public hearing was held on January 14th of 2021. There were 74 public hearing comments submitted and no call-in speakers. Public hearing comments expressed concern about the loss of trees and wildlife, environmental impacts, traffic, air, noise pollution, school impacts, and density. It was also a request for the area to remain as open space. Council had the following comments and questions. They expressed concern over the density, parking, and buffer reduction. There was questions regarding the greenway construction condition, questions regarding the ponds and the property to the east of the subject site, and a request for staff to prepare a written report on the ownership of the ponds, a question regarding the rec fund payment. And since the public hearing, the applicant has made several changes. They have, for information, submitted a cost estimate of the greenway construction and clarified the greenway condition. They've increased the planting standard for the southern perimeter buffer. They have increased the minimum buffer width on Lake Grove Boulevard and increased the height of the upper story trees within the Davis Drive streetscape. And so for staff's overall finding and analysis with the Cary Community Plan, there are a lot of components to this case. So in order to help us talk through our overall finding, we thought using a table to kind of break down the case by various elements could help to frame the conversation. So for this case, staff's analysis finds that the rezoning furthers certain policies of the Imagine Cary Community Plan, but struggles to further other policies. And again, to help summarize our findings, we're going to look at each component of the request, and staff has prepared our preliminary thought on whether it's consistent or inconsistent with the plan. So we'll start with the use. We know that the plan recognizes the need for additional housing with policies from the Live and Shape chapters. The proposal for multifamily uses is somewhat consistent with the commercial center designation, as multifamily is listed as an incidental use. However, if it's approved, it would greatly limit the non-residential development options, which is somewhat inconsistent with the Shape chapter as well as work chapter policies. But overall, we find that use is more consistent than not with a plan. Moving on to design and architecture, the rezoning will allow for an urban form with the height of the building that could be between 5 to 6 stories. The architecture of the building meets the minimum required by the LDO and adds additional conditions such as increasing the masonry on certain facades. The commitment to 50% structure parking furthers policies from the Shape chapter as well. Some of the conditions, however, lack value that would add to the design. Staff's overall finding is that the architecture and the design is consistent with the plan. Staff has expressed concerns with the deviations from Cary's LDO regarding streetscapes and buffers. Davis Drive is a major thoroughfare, and the applicant's proposal for a 30-foot wide streetscape with reduced planting standards and significant encroachments will impact the performance of the buffers. The applicants have noted it is their intent to activate the streetscape with encroachments, including stoops and other features that would typically not be allowed within the streetscape. And staff notes that while activated streetscapes are an important part of planning and development, we don't believe that Davis Drive is an appropriate street for a reduced streetscape due to the width of the road and the volume of the traffic on the road. The request also proposes to clear and grade 100% of the buffers to the south, and the existing southern properties include current uses such as a gas station as well as office and institutional uses. And so staff's finding is that these deviations from Cary standards are inconsistent with multiple policies of the Shape chapter regarding character and transitions. Community gathering area for the site is more than 6 times the required amount per the LDO, which will further the Shape chapter of the plan. And lastly, the applicant is proposing the recreation fund payment not be required due to previous land dedication. Staff notes, however, the rezoning would be adding more than 200 units to the overall PDD, which was not contemplated in 2005. The applicant has committed to construction of a portion of the greenway exclusive of stream buffers and wetlands, and therefore our overall finding is that this is more consistent than not with the plan. And so staff's overall finding for the case is that when looking at all the components of the case, on balance, we find that the case is more consistent than not with a Cary community plan. And so some of the questions that the board consider when they're looking at this as well is, are the use and density for the site appropriate? Is the design and architecture, building height appropriate for the location? Do the commitments that are being proposed that are above and beyond the LDO adequately offset the modifications that are being requested? So this concludes staff's presentation. The applicant's representative, Jamie Schwedler with Parker Poe, is on the line and will share an overview of the request. Ms. Schwedler, you may begin.
Thank you, Ms. Dry. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I'm Jamie Schwedler with Parker Poe at 301 Fayetteville Street here on behalf of the applicant SunCap. Our team is also on the line, and many of you may remember it's largely the same team that brought over 125,000 square feet of office, commercial, and restaurant space with the Wegmans mixed-use center directly north on the site and shown on the screen there. This MU3 South parcel is the last remaining southern piece of the Twin Lakes mixed-use village and adds multifamily units to an area that staff has shown is underserved by this type of housing to complete that vision of the mixed-use center. Ms. Dry did a great job summarizing the case and the significant commitments that we are offering. I'll try to focus on why some of those commitments were important to us in terms of consistency with the Cary community plan, and hope that you'll find this consistent and in the public interest, namely because we're adding an appropriate use consistent with the shape, live, and work chapters and commitments to structured parking, architectural elements, and greenway and open space that are consistent with shape and engage policies. We're also doing that to be consistent with this similar request to the north that completes this Davis Drive streetscape. So first, the multifamily use is an appropriate use, is consistent with the shape chapter and the future growth framework map designation of commercial center, which recognizes this as an incidental use. This use has been contemplated on this location for over 20 years, and 50 units of multifamily could be built on the site today without a rezoning. This use was recognized in the original PDD as important to provide housing that's easily walkable within the mixed-use center. And this increase in the 200 units that we're requesting over what's an existing entitlement responds to that growing need for housing on a site that's a little over 1 mile south of RTP and where only 13% of the residential product in the area is multifamily. The need for housing was reflected in the 2017 designation, but it was also acknowledged in 2018 when the overture age-restricted zoning to the north, the staff pointed out that housing targeted toward millennials was needed in this area to support the workforce. They made the same note here in that the site could offer exactly the sort of location desired by the workforce and is consistent with policies 1 and 2 of the work chapter. Simply put, multifamily is an appropriate use and a better use here on this site, given the configuration of this remaining parcel that can complete the mixed-use center in a better way than the original, some of the remaining entitlements could. Second, the parking and architectural commitments offered are consistent with the work chapter. Policy 2 encourages types of locations and built environments that will enable us to successfully compete for businesses and workers of today and tomorrow. For example, by encouraging the growth of vibrant and walkable mixed-use centers and that create live, work, and play environments. And that's what we're doing here by completing the remainder of the southern portion of the site. We've committed to 50% of the parking being located in structured parking in order to reduce surface parking and encourage walkability. Slide 8 summarizes the page long of architectural commitments in our proposal, which include that the facades fronting Davis and Lake Grove must have a minimum 40% of masonry, no blank walls over maybe wider than 20 feet, and that the elevations must have vertical bays and offsets. We've also included a new concept of allowing stoops on Davis Drive and provided screening mechanisms for the structured parking garage to the extent those face the daycare and areas to the south. Together, these ensure high quality and visual variation consistent with the work chapter and delivering the type of area that workers that are trying to locate near RTP can easily find and navigate, and then also be able to navigate in a walkable manner as they go to get their groceries or services to the north. And finally, our greenway and environmental commitments are consistent with the Engaged chapter. Goal 1 of this plan seeks to evaluate open space requirements for future developments and ensure developments are providing adequate open space that maximizes the public benefit, working with the developers to set aside important open space that provides for trail connectivity. Goal 2 is to provide Cary citizens with highly functional, safe, well-maintained greenway networks by developing a comprehensive plan for a greenway system and recognizing that the major effort in the near future will need to be to complete the remaining gaps in the greenway. To do this, the plan planned on funding greenway expansion by the town. We are furthering these goals by completing the western side of the greenway around Hatches Pond from Lake Grove to just south of the Airport Boulevard. And if Mr. I could bring up slide 18, there's a concept map that shows roughly in orange where that slide is. I mean, it's the prior case.
Aaron,
But
I
here we
I
go.
believe it may be slide 87. There we go.
There we go. So the area in orange on your screen shows the approximate location of the 3,000 linear feet that we'd be committing to building a portion of that greenway. The reason it doesn't go all the way to Airport Boulevard is that there's a small area that's already been built, and so we'd be tying into those areas to the north. This portion has neither been designed nor funded by the town, so we'd be advancing the delivery of this key public amenity for residents to use for recreation as a means to walk or bike to dinner instead of drive. With respect to the multifamily rec fee, this is consistent again with how the overture and original PDD was written, because over 60 acres of open space and roughly 10 acres of parkland was provided in the original PDD directly adjacent to our site. So we're not asking for a deviation or anything different than what the original PDD had envisioned with respect to the additional open space. And we're asking for consistent treatment with how both the overture request has come through, as well as other similar PDD requests have been presented to the town. However, our estimates show that the construction cost of this greenway commitment is at least equivalent to and likely far more than what we would have otherwise be paying in rec fees. It's roughly an average of $1 million to construct that 3,000 linear feet. And by adding this as a zoning commitment, we'd be required to deliver it before our first certificate of occupancy. So residents who have long waited for this improvement and asked the town to fund this greenway would have this amenity constructed by our build out, hopefully in late next year. I also note that Wake County voted earlier today to devote $4 million of park bond money toward greenways. And our proposal is taking that burden off of taxpayers and putting the burden of that $1 million improvement roughly on the developer. We're also delivering over 6 times the amount of the community gathering area required by the LDO and committing to elements such as an outdoor lawn and exercise station. Finally, with respect to the Engaged chapter and how it emphasizes the outdoors and taking advantage of environmental areas, our streetscapes do exceed the existing PDD requirements, which would only require a 20 to 30 streetscape on Davis Drive. It did not require a streetscape on Lake Grove Boulevard at all. So in both instances, we're offering a higher commitment than the PDD originally envisioned for this area. The reason that we're doing that is that we're trying to create this unique frontage of these stoops to kind of have an interest along Davis Drive, but we're also doing it to be consistent with the way the entire Davis Drive area has been approved. The streetscape from Airport Boulevard to our site has already been approved to have this reduced streetscape to 30 feet. And so requiring a 50-foot in this location would be out of sorts and look inconsistent. So we're again asking for the same treatment that the council has already approved for all of the mixed use development to the north. That's also consistent with the buffer reductions to the north, in that there's a small area with Morrisville that would be able to be developed with this parcel, so we wouldn't want a buffer intervening. And it's also consistent with the way that the disturbance of the buffers have been approved along Davis Drive. Again, Lake Grove didn't require a streetscape at all, so we're offering an additional 25-foot streetscape that wouldn't otherwise be required, and we're offering to oversize the plantings in both of those streetscapes to offset the issue of the slightly reduced streetscapes from the LDO, but again, offering more than the PDD would otherwise require. And to be clear, the multifamily could be built on this site today. It's a point that the mayor made during the public hearing. It's just that it wouldn't require the same amount of structured parking, or certainly wouldn't require the greenway. So it would result in something that would be able to just be satisfied with just the minimum LDO requirements. And what we're doing is, as we're increasing the density, we're also offsetting it with these important commitments, such as structured parking and the greenway commitment, and oversizing the plantings in order to offset any of that density and still deliver what the Cary Community Plan calls for here, which is providing needing housing in this type of multifamily.
Ms. Schwelder, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you. So in sum, we believe that the sum of these commitments and the need for multifamily housing in this area close to RTP is consistent with the Cary Community Plan. And we respect that the town has overall found that consistently, and we respectfully request that you send this case forward with a favorable recommendation. We're happy to answer any questions, and the team is on the line tonight as well.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Dry, on behalf of the staff, and Ms. Schwedler and behalf of the applicant for your presentation. So now we'll go to staff, to the board for any questions you may have. And I'll start off with Don Hamilton. Don, do you have any questions for the staff or the applicant?
Just a couple of quick ones for staff. Is it accurate that council did approve lesser LDO and buffering locally to that area?
Yes, the Twin Lakes PDD for the MU parcels had streetscape widths that were set. They could be between 20 to 30 feet in width. That could be a modification from the LDO standards. I will say that the MU parcels were primarily intended to be non-residential, with the residential component being vertically mixed over non-residential. But yeah, that is the case.
Great, thank you. And I missed this one. I'm assuming this PDD was set up before the Cary Community Plan. Is that correct?
That's correct. It was approved in 2004.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Don. Mary Jo, do you have any questions?
I do not have questions. I think a lot of information that I was interested in was covered by the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Steve Crutchfield, questions?
Yeah, just a couple. MU3 North. That is multifamily senior. Is that right? I can't remember how that was approved.
Yes, that's correct. It was approved with age restriction. So multifamily with age restriction for senior apartments.
And is that also, I know it's either just opened or about to open. The height for MU3 North is about the same height of what's being proposed here?
The Overture site set a maximum height of 66 feet, so it's very similar. This site is requesting a maximum height of 70 feet.
Okay, so but in MU3 North, I drive by there all the time, but I don't. Does it have a parking deck, or is this going to be separate? Or the one we're talking about would have a parking deck, which would make it different than North?
Yeah,
That's
this
correct.
site. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Katie.
I was just going to mention this site is proposing a parking deck, and I'll let Ms. Schwaler jump in if you want to talk about the Overture site. I believe it did not.
It did not. This site has the 50% minimum requirement for parking to be in some sort of structured deck. The Overture did not have any commitment to that at all.
Okay, thank you. And then the lakes and the proposed parkland on Twin Lakes Boulevard, the town already owns all that property, right?
That's correct. The town owns the property around the lakes. Yes.
Okay, and then that park is going to, when would that park be?
I don't believe that there is a timeline slated at this point for the park to be built, but the land has been dedicated for the park.
Okay, and then the park that the town owns and the space that's being discussed for MU3 South, those are separate. They're not being combined, right?
That's
As
correct.
far
They
as
would-
like gathering space and open space and things of that nature.
That's correct. And if I could just emphasize that point, at the public hearing, there was a lot of confusion on the emails that were received that I believe there was some confusion from the public thinking that we were somehow developing over top of the town park. And as you can see on the screen, that town park is to the right and kind of cut off. It has no bearing on the open space that we're offering on our site.
Okay, and then last, just to reinforce, whenever we decide, this has already been approved and something's going to be built here, whether it's what we're talking about now or what's already been approved. But regardless, this is going to have multifamily housing on it.
So the current approval for Twin Lakes for the MU parcels allows 50 multifamily units, so it's a relatively low amount. It also allowed 150 assisted living dwelling units as well. So this would actually be separate from that. They're proposing to kind of separate out from that shared use allotment to build this proposed development.
Okay, but regardless, it will be developed.
You're correct. There's a current entitlement. It could be developed as commercial office with 50 multifamily units or, assisted living.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Jessica Pearson, do you have questions for staff or the applicant?
I do, and thankfully, Steve asked one of my questions. So it was mentioned that a traffic study wasn't completed, and I may have missed why that was.
This
Sure.
site,
Go
this
ahead.
site fell just, I'll start and I'll turn it over to the applicant. This site fell just under the threshold for a traffic study. Cary's LDO requires a traffic study if a site generates more than 100 peak hour trips. And this site generated 77 AM trips and 99 PM peak hour trips, so just under the threshold.
Okay, that makes sense. In the zoning entitlement that you were just referring to, have all of the MU parcels been developed, and this is the last one?
There are a few that are not yet developed. And if I could ask Aaron to pull up a slide to help illustrate. Give me just a second. I'll get the slide number. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind pulling up slide 75.
Katie, can I ask one question?
Yes.
So the intent of the mixed use was to mix the uses together. And what we're looking at for this parcel is it's a single use in that it's just residential. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. And what we're looking at with this slide, it shows all of the MU parcels. There are a few MU parcels that are yet to be developed when you're not looking at this site. So MU1, MU4, and MU5, those have not been developed yet. You can see from this table, though, they're relatively small pieces of property. They each are, a little over 1 acre. They total about, 4.29 acres. And
Oh, sorry, Katie, go ahead.
and with this site, the applicant is proposing to remove MU3 South from the shared allotment. And again, they would only be proposing residential.
And just to follow up on that, I actually don't think that answer, that the beginning part of that answer is correct. There is no vertical mixed use requirement for the mixed use center. So I don't know if you were just doing this with like an example, but
that's what I was intending. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. That is, I mean, there's a lot of design standards and kind of statements about the mix of uses, but there's no requirement that there be a vertically mixed use. And I think if you look at the entitlements all together, if this whole thing had been done at the same time, if all of the MU parcels had been developed at the same time, that would have been, we would look at the case and say it's been a mix of uses. We're just looking at MU3 South as
Okay.
one use because the other portions to its north have already been developed. So I just wanted to clarify that to make sure there was no confusion there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that clarification because that's kind of what I was wondering about. You know, I'm relatively new to the board. I didn't see the previous PDD. So I do think that the use is appropriate. I was just trying to understand when we say mixed use, we're talking about mixing the uses along all of the parcels, not vertically stacking them.
It can probably mean both things in different contexts, but in this particular PDD, there was no requirement for vertical mixed use, and all of those, the chart that Ms. Dry has shown on the screen, all of those uses were allowed in combination on those on MU1 through MU5 in different combinations. So it really encouraged a mix over the whole center.
So if I just want to ask one more question about this particular slide. So for the remaining allocation, if the proposed rezoning tonight goes through, there would no longer be any multifamily units developed in the remaining parcels. They would only be developed as retail, office, or restaurant. Is that accurate?
They could still potentially be developed for multifamily. So what the applicant's requesting to do is just remove MU3 South from that mix, from that shared
Oh.
allotment. So that what that means is that that allowance for 50 multifamily units remains, and any of these other MU parcels could use that to develop up to 50 multifamily units.
But the expectation isn't that all the remaining allocation would be developed necessarily. It just could be developed.
It could be developed, and given the size and the shape of the lots that are left, it's very unlikely that you know that full yield would ever be come to fruition.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I really appreciate it. And that's it. Those were all my questions, and I really appreciate both of you answering them and clarifying that for me. Thank you. Dan, you're muted again. We can see your mouth moving. We just can't hear anything.
You may be better off for that. Thank you. Jessica McClure, do you have any questions for the board of staff, or for the staff or the applicant?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for staff, just real quick. So MU3 North, that is not a mix of uses. That's age restricted residential.
Correct. MU3 North went through a rezoning just a few years ago, and they were approved to build 200, age-restricted multifamily units. So they went through essentially the same process that this site's going through, where they're requesting to remove themselves from the table and build one use on that particular site.
Got it. And then last question, as far as pedestrian connectivity along Davis Drive, I'm assuming there's a gap in the sidewalk for that one little holdout property that's not part of MU3 South or North.
So that particular piece of property is within Morrisville's jurisdiction, and a portion of that is being developed with the Overture site, and the development can cross jurisdictional boundaries. And the applicants are actually proposing that the southern portion of that site have the potential to develop with this. So there is the possibility that that it could develop cohesively, even though it would, remain in Morrisville.
Gotcha. One more question with that. Is there a continuous pedestrian connection, say, from this site up to the Wegmans or the services that are north?
Yes, that will be a requirement to have sidewalk along Hatches Pond Road, which will be the road running kind of parallel to Davis Drive through the shopping center, and then of course there will also be sidewalk required along Davis Drive.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. I have a few questions. One, I guess the first one is at 41 units an acre, and I don't have anything to compare it against off the top of my head, Katie. How does that compare in density to some of the other multifamily that we see?
It's one of the higher densities that we've seen proposed. Yes.
Thanks. And so, and I don't know if it was slide 83, but at some point you were giving some data on apartments and the percentage in terms of dwelling units in that area that were multifamily. And I know that the applicant's representative talked about that, you know, this may be an area that's a little light on multifamily. I'm wondering if in the data and the you know, what would have been helpful, I guess, you know, whether we saw in an earlier applicant that we saw, you know, multifamily within a half mile or a mile away. Does that, when you have that housing mix, thank you, within a half mile of site, does that take into account the 250 units that are under construction right now by the Alta Ren development on Carpenter Morrisville Road?
I don't believe it pulled units that were under construction. And I don't know for sure off the top of my head. That's something I can look into, but I don't think it pulled in under construction sites.
So right on that intersection, approximately a third of the mile, 1/3 of a mile away from this site, there's 250 units that are well under construction. Matter of fact, they're already, I think leasing will start later this spring. So I'm just thinking about the regions. Well, I know we're talking about the PDD, you showed the commercial area, and I'm just trying to think about the area, because right next to this site, there's Grace Park, which also has multifamily. So I'm just looking at, you know, if we step out just a little bit further in terms of the housing types that were there. So that's, I guess that's not a question, this is a comment. So I just asked if that development was considered in there. The question I had about height was already taken into consideration, so it was already answered.
I just had one clarifying answer on the density issue. I know it might not be obvious from the way that it's calculated, but some of this appears denser because we're sharing a stormwater pond with the Overture directly to the north. That is a similar size and shape site that also had 200 units. So it's a similar density, but normally you would have additional area for a stormwater pond, and it's excluded from here. So it appears that it's higher, but they're really very similar.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thank you. Is there one last time around? Is there any other questions from any other board members? Speak now.
Dan, I have a question.
Sure.
Do the adjacent lakes handle any of the stormwater for the sites that are part of the PDD?
I don't believe they do. And if anyone from the applicant's team would like to speak to this, please feel free to chime in. But the sites for Twin Lakes and the MU parcels are developing their own stormwater.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. This is David Lee with SunCap. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good question. So we're required to treat all our stormwater on site, within our own community. So no, those would not be used for our stormwater.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll ask one more time. Any other questions on the part of the board? Hearing none, would someone like to make a motion on 20 REZ03, the Twin Lakes PDD amendment, MU3?
Sure, I'll make a motion.
Please.
I move that the board find case number 20 REZ03 is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans for the reasons set forth in the staff report, presentation, and discussion by the Planning and Zoning Board.
Is there a second to the motion?
This is Don. I'll second it.
Okay. And we have a second by Don Hamilton. Thank you. So Jessica McClure, do you want to start us off? Jessica Pearson, I'm sorry. Do you want to start us off on the discussion?
Sure. So I have a couple thoughts about, I do think that the use is appropriate, and I think that the increased density might seem problematic at first, but I do appreciate that the applicant is trying to offset this increased density with the greenway commitment, which I think is pretty tremendous. The length of it, it's over 3,000 linear feet, and it's going to cost $1 million. So that I do believe is a pretty significant zoning condition, as well as I appreciate the nature of the architectural standards. And at first I was a little off put by the buffer reduction, but it was later clarified that this reduction is consistent with adjacent parcels. So just all in all, I think that while the use is appropriate, I was struggling a little bit with the increased density, but after the presentation and the staff report, I feel that it is consistent, and that is why I made the motion. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Don, comments?
Yeah, I agree with what Jessica said. I originally was not going to vote until the presentation played all the way out. I had the same struggles with the density and the buffering and stuff like that. But after the presentation, I think everything falls in line. And I also appreciate the added stuff they're doing for Cary.
All right, thank you. Mary Jo, comments?
I would agree as well with a lot of the points that Jessica made. I think that the greenway completion is a pretty substantial contribution, and I think that tends to offset a lot of the concerns in terms of the density, as she mentioned. So that's a big win for the town. And you know, it's not going to be much else you could put except for multifamily in that little space there in a very heavily traveled area. So I think it's a reasonable recommendation. That's all I have.
Okay, thanks, Mary Jo. Steve Crutchfield, comment for the discussion.
I'm in agreement with my fellow board members. I think in all the cases that we've had over the years, I don't know that we've ever dealt with fees and before. So that one was that was very new to me, and I think we're doing the right thing with the offset.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. And Jessica McClure, comments for discussion.
Yeah, I honestly kind of went back and forth on this one, frankly, as far as having office use in here. I go to Grace Park very frequently. And I know that the lack of multifamily in the area, even, you know, like you said, just down south, they're putting some more in there. You know, I'm all for, I guess, development coming in and improving walkability and keeping cars out of the parking lot of Grace Park so that those of us who don't live within walking distance can park there. But I honestly think, you know, it's by right 50. There's not really much else you can do here. So I think, you know, I'm probably in agreement with everybody else that this is, you know, probably the best use for this spot.
Okay, thanks. Well, from what I've heard from my fellow board members, I think I'm going to be in the minority because I won't vote for this. And although I appreciate everything the applicant's done, I think that there's it's a persuasive argument about completing the greenway and the connectivity and all those elements. And I think that they have a lot of merit. Where my decision comes down is looking at the PDD itself. I remember being on the board when we approved MU3 North. I remember the conversation there when we approved the 200 units for multifamily that at that time, and I guess my opinion hasn't changed, is that basically took care of all the multifamily that was going to be built on that. Because what we'd be saying by building the multifamily we have there, that we're going to abandon, you know, the goal of essentially the entire office goal. Because, you know, there's been less than 3,000 square feet of office built out there. It built less than half the retail that's there. And So I think it's for that reason. I also do step back and I did look at, you know, do a mile circle around there, and I think that there are other things that could be built there besides multifamily. There's other multifamily that's being built there. We know, given where the market is and where the market is, particularly for multifamily, that there'll be other multifamily, there'll be other opportunities that come in to develop there. There's mixed uses within that area, maybe not necessarily within that PDD. I remember when that PDD came about. I remember when that was all greenfield in there. I remember when the first home was built behind to the north there. And it was intended to be a low-rise, primarily, you know, detached single-family sort of development. That was the plan. And so although I applaud the applicant for all that they're doing, and I can certainly understand why folks are in the affirmative, and I think it's very easy to fall that way, I've decided to not support the motion. So with that, let's put it to a vote, our verbal vote. So we'll start off. Don Hamilton.
Aye.
Mary Jo Hill.
Aye.
Steve Crutchfield.
Aye.
Jessica Pearson.
Aye.
Jessica McClure.
Aye.
And I vote no. So the motion passes 5-1.
Thank you.
So there's no new business before us this evening. So the only thing left to do is to adjourn our meeting. I'd like to thank everybody for participating in tonight's meeting, both the board, the staff, and all the applicants and their representatives. And if you've at home have been watching this, thank you for joining us tonight. And I will adjourn this meeting at this time. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.